In this concept video, we're going to talk about how to use the trail wrist in the golf swing. So the trail wrist is one of the areas where amateurs tend to struggle. I'm going to show you a few of my favorite drills for working on the trail wrist, and we're going to talk about some of the data you might get if you have a device like Hack Motion, where you can look for the actual measurements of the wrist. I think there's two big things that we want to look at when we're talking about the trail wrist, and I'll connect them to the trail arm and even a little bit to the pivot. So there are two big areas to look for when you're looking at the trail wrist. The first is increasing extension during transition. This is the classic casting pattern. Casting is typically thought of as more of an unhinge, but from my experience looking at 3D, it's more frequently a cast of the flexion extension direction. So the wrist going like this, as opposed to going that way in transition or going into extension. So if I go up to the top of the swing and I'm looking at my wrist graph, I want to see it going into extension during that first half of the downswing until I get down to about delivery position. And then I can lose some of that extension. But this relates to the second point, which is I don't personally think that that loss of extension comes from an active flexion. I think it comes more from a active ulnar deviation. So if I was to extend the wrist and try to ulnar deviate, well, when I extend the wrist, I naturally get a little bit of radial deviation. And as I start trying to increase the amount of ulnar deviation, you can see that I lost a good amount of that flexion or extension of that wrist. Now, when the wrist is in this nearly full extended position halfway down, when I try to go into ulnar deviation, what ends up happening is it creates a little bit of forearm supination. That one's hard to see even on the graphs because there's a global movement instead of looking at the isolated forearm movement, but we can see that ulnar deviation continuing through impact. A lot of golfers who tend to struggle with the trail wrist, they tend to lose that flexion early and then radial deviate on the way through. So it has more of a look of lose that extension, so the wrist is pretty flat here, and then it's increasing radial on the way through, which has more of like a chicken wing look if you put the left hand on. So the two big things that will give us a really strong, good look to our trail arm are getting the extension early during transition, and then keeping that ulnar deviation through the ball later. In order to do that, in order to do both of those, I have to feel like I'm hitting it a little bit more with my core and my body rotation, and a little bit less with just throwing the arm or throwing the club head at the golf ball. So I usually like to work on these in 9-3, 10-2, full swing, kind of gradually working from a release style drill all the way to a full swing drill. If you struggle with the release style drill, then it means that you're more struggling with kind of the arms or your pivot location. But if you can do it pretty well on the short swing or the 9-3, and then it breaks down when you go up to the fuller swing, that usually means it's more of like a backswing or a transition issue. How you're either loading or creating speed during the downswing is getting you out of position, and then you can't do the release that you normally would do during your 9-3. So we've got a couple drills that we're going to use. One, to feel that ulnar deviation, we're going to do more of a throw. So the bottom of the swing is going to feel much more like a palm press or like a shot put, where if I was holding a ball in my palm like this, and I was to focus on unhinging as my arm is pushing, kind of like this, then that would give a position where I would get into a follow through kind of like this. As opposed to if I did kind of, let's say, a more athletic throw where I did it with the wrist, this would get me into a position that would look more like a scoop, kind of like this. Now, once I've done a few of those, I can do more of a one-arm drill where there I felt like I got into that same shot put feel with a little bit of that ulnar deviation. So then the next piece would be in taking it more into a full swing drill. I love doing the open trail hand. Some of the best drills for working on the trail hand are to take some of the leverage of throwing it or flexing the wrist and rehinging, taking some of that away. So if I open the hand just like this, I can still get into that good ulnar deviation and press position, just like I was doing the shot put, and I can maintain that feel all the way through impact. so I can get into a really solid strike and feel like the club face is in a really strong loaded position and I'm hitting it a little bit more with my body. This can be done even on fuller swings like 10 to 2s and even up to full swings. With the full swing, you really will feel a little bit of this shallowing, because if you were to push and kind of, it's very hard to push the club or steepen it with the open hand. You'll much more feel some of this natural shallowing, which is accompanied by the increasing extension of the wrist, one of the big hallmarks for really good ball strikers. So those are two good drills you can do: 9 to 3s, kind of that little shot put drill, or open hand drill to work on cleaning up some of your trail wrist mechanics. There can be some complementary things, like your body has to be in a good bracing position in order for that to work. If you tend to early extend or stand up or have too much slide or too much lunge or too much hang back, those pivot issues can make it almost impossible to have a perfect trail hand wrist. So I have other videos that help you understand how to work on those pivot things. But from a trail wrist perspective, a great starting place is working on the shot put feel for the 9 to 3s, and then the open hands working on bigger and bigger swings. If you do that, you'll master your trail hand movements for the golf swing. So if you like how I broke this down and you want to know more, click on the link in the description below for more drills to help you improve your golf game. So let's do open trail hand, full swing. If you flip down to the bottom, you'll feel a lot of spacing. I was able to keep that pressure all the way up into the finish. Trail hand felt great.